Somewhere inside a robotics park in Shanghai, a robot just walked past a room full of reporters, made eye contact with one of them, tracked their gaze, and smiled back. Nothing about that sentence should feel unusual in 2026, except for one detail that made almost everyone in that room visibly uncomfortable. When they reached out and touched her arm, it was warm. Not warm like a laptop that has been running too long. Warm like skin. That robot is called Moya, built by a Shanghai startup called DroidUp, and it has quickly become one of the most talked about and most debated humanoid robots to come out of China this year. In this video, we are going to break down exactly what Moya is, what she can actually do right now, what she cannot do yet, and why a machine this advanced is generating just as much unease as it is excitement. Stick around, because by the end of this, you will understand why engineers who spend their entire careers building robots are calling this one of the strangest, most impressive things they have seen in years. Let's start with the basics. Moya stands about 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighs roughly 70 pounds, deliberately built to match the proportions of an average adult human, rather than towering over people the way a lot of industrial humanoids do. DroidUp is not shy about what they are going for here. They call Moya the world's first fully biomimetic embodied intelligent robot, a phrase that basically means the company tried to make a machine that looks, moves, and physically feels like an actual person, not just one that walks on 2 legs and waves at a trade show camera. The most talked about detail is the skin. Moya's exterior is built from silicone layered over internal structures designed to mimic real human tissue, including padding that imitates the soft fat layer beneath human skin, and yes, an internal frame engineered to resemble a rib cage. Underneath all of that sits an active thermal system that keeps the skin sitting at a genuine human body temperature, somewhere between 32 and 36 degrees Celsius, or roughly 90 to 97 degrees Fahrenheit. That is not a passive side effect of running motors and batteries. It is a deliberate, engineered feature, achieved through embedded heating elements distributed across the synthetic skin, paired with thermal sensors that continuously monitor and adjust output to keep the temperature stable, regardless of the surrounding room. DroidUp's founder, a robotics veteran named Li Qingdu, has said plainly that he believes a robot meant to serve people should feel warm, almost like a living being someone could genuinely connect with, rather than the cold, hard-shelled machines most of us picture when we hear the word robot. There is real behavioral science behind that. Reasoning, too. Researchers have shown for decades that touch and perceived temperature play a measurable role in how humans build trust and feel social connection with one another, which is presumably why DroidUp chose to engineer this specific, expensive, and technically difficult feature, rather than leaving Moya with the cool, plastic surface almost every other humanoid robot on the market currently has. Then there is the face. Behind Moya's eyes sit small cameras that track the faces of people nearby in real time, allowing her to hold eye contact, follow someone's gaze around a room, and respond with subtle, timed nods while listening. The exact kind of small social cues humans use constantly without even thinking about them. Her face itself runs on roughly 25 separate points of facial movement, enough range to express joy, sorrow, anger, and surprise with a level of nuance that most humanoid robots, even very advanced ones, simply do not attempt. DroidUp has shown footage of Moya smiling, catching a reporter's eye mid-sentence and adjusting her expression in response to the tone of a conversation happening around her. And she walks. That might sound like a minor detail, but in the humanoid robotics world right now, it genuinely is not. A huge number of the most expressive, most lifelike robots being built today are essentially stationary, bolted to a base or a chair, because getting a full-sized bipedal robot to walk naturally is still one of the hardest unsolved problems in the entire field. Moya moves using a platform DroidUp calls Walker 3, built on lessons learned from the company's earlier Walker series robots, one of which reportedly completed a half-marathon-length race in Beijing without needing a battery swap. DroidUp claims Moya achieves 92% human-like walking accuracy at a steady pace of about 0.83 meters per second, roughly the walking speed of an unhurried adult. That specific number, 92%, is the headline figure the company has leaned into publicly, and it is also the most contested part of Moya's entire reveal. Here is where we need to be honest about the gap between the marketing and the demonstration footage, because it matters. Multiple outlets that watched Moya walk in person, rather than in a tightly edited promotional video, described her. Movement is noticeably stiff, with audible mechanical clicking from her joints on each step. The consistent comparison people kept reaching for was walking in an unfamiliar pair of heels, technically functional, clearly deliberate, but visibly not quite natural. DroidUp has not published exactly how that 92% figure was calculated, whether it is measuring stride length, joint angle accuracy, gait symmetry, or some combination of metrics, which makes it difficult to independently verify. That kind of unverified benchmark is fairly common across the humanoid robotics industry right now, where companies are racing to publish headline-grabbing percentages long before any independent lab has a standardized way to test and compare them. A number like 92% sounds precise and scientific, but without a published methodology, it functions more as a marketing anchor than a peer-reviewed measurement. And that distinction matters if you are trying to judge how close this technology actually is to indistinguishable human movement versus how close DroidUp wants you to believe it is. So the honest takeaway here is not that Moya walks with 92% of human grace in a way you would fail to notice on the street. It is that DroidUp has made real, measurable progress on a genuinely hard problem, while still leaving a gap that is small enough to be impressive and large enough to be immediately noticeable to anyone watching closely. One of the more unusual engineering choices behind Moya is her modularity. DroidUp built her on what they call a modular bionic platform architecture, meaning the underlying hardware, the skeleton, the motors, the sensors, stays the same across different configurations, while the outer appearance, including gender presentation, can be swapped depending on the intended role. The company has confirmed it plans to offer both male and female variants using the same core platform, along with customizable facial features and heads, positioning Moya less as a single fixed product and more as a base platform that can be configured differently depending on whether it ends up working in a hospital, a train station, a museum, or somewhere else entirely. And that list of intended locations is not incidental. DroidUp has been fairly specific about where it actually wants Moya deployed, and it is not primarily private homes. The company has pointed toward healthcare, elder care, education, and public facing commercial environments like banks, train stations, and shopping malls, places where a warm, expressive, socially responsive presence could plausibly serve a real function. Greeting visitors, assisting elderly patients who benefit from consistent social interaction, or working in settings where a calm, human presence helps put people at ease. Aging populations across much of East Asia have intensified interest in robotic caregiving specifically, and Moya's entire design philosophy, warmth, eye contact, emotional responsiveness, reads much more like an attempt to solve a genuine caregiving and companionship gap than a simple engineering flex. China, in particular, has been investing heavily in elder care technology as its population ages, and the ratio of working-age caregivers to elderly residents continues to shrink, a demographic pressure that several other Asian economies, most notably Japan, have been grappling with for decades already. A robot capable of holding a genuine seeming conversation, remembering context, and providing consistent patient companionship without fatigue is, at least on paper, a plausible partial answer to a real and growing staffing shortage in elder care facilities, rather than a solution being built purely for novelty. That said, it would be incomplete to talk about Moya without acknowledging the reaction she has actually gotten, because it has been sharply divided. A significant portion of the coverage and public response has landed somewhere between fascinated and deeply unsettled. The core issue is a well-documented psychological effect called the uncanny valley, first described by robotics researcher Masahiro Mori back in the 1970s. The idea is that as a robot becomes more human-like, people generally feel more comfortable with it, right up until it gets close enough to real without being indistinguishable from it, at which point comfort drops sharply and turns into unease. Multiple journalists who saw Moya in person described exactly that reaction, an initial sense of being impressed followed by a growing discomfort the longer they looked at her, particularly once they learned about the warm skin and the eye tracking working together. Warmth turns out to be one of the strongest signals human brains use to separate people from objects, and once that signal gets convincingly faked, a lot of people report the unease growing rather than shrinking. It is worth noting this is precisely the opposite conclusion many robotics designers have drawn from decades of studying this exact problem. Companies like Boston Dynamics have deliberately leaned into an obviously mechanical, non-human aesthetic for their robots for years, partly because a robot that clearly announces itself as a machine tends to avoid triggering that uncanny valley discomfort altogether. DroidUp is making the opposite bet, wagering that pushing all the way through the valley to something convincingly warm and expressive will eventually land on the other side, in territory that feels genuinely comforting rather than unsettling, even though the current version of Moya still appears to sit somewhere in the uncomfortable middle of that curve. There is also a more direct concern that has come up repeatedly in coverage of Moya, which is the likelihood that a customizable, warm, human-proportioned robot capable of holding eye contact and expressing emotion will end up being marketed or used for companionship and intimacy purposes, regardless of what DroidUp's official positioning says. Several outlets covering the reveal explicitly raise this, some bluntly describing the broader category Moya sits in as heading toward what has been nicknamed the robot companion market. DroidUp's own public messaging has stayed focused on healthcare, education, and commercial applications rather than companionship in that sense, but the honest reality is that a modular, gender-configurable, human warm android sitting at this level of realism is entering a market where that use case already exists and is already growing, whether or not any individual manufacturer intends to lead with it. Now let's talk about price and timing, because this is the part where the gap between headline and reality really matters. Moya is expected to cost roughly $173,000, with pre-order estimates reportedly ranging as high as $200,000 depending on customization. That price tag puts her firmly in institutional territory rather than consumer territory, the kind of number a hospital network, a research institution, or a large commercial property might justify, not an individual buyer picking one up the way you would buy a laptop. And despite the framing you might see online suggesting Moya has already hit store shelves, the actual rollout is considerably more modest than that. DroidUp is targeting availability toward the end of this year with an initial production run of only around 50 units. That is not a mass market launch. That is closer to a controlled early-stage deployment, the kind of rollout companies use to gather real-world performance data, work out durability issues, and refine the technology before attempting anything resembling true mass production. It is worth putting Moya in context alongside the rest of what is happening in Chinese humanoid robotics right now, because she is not appearing in a vacuum. China's humanoid robot sector has been expanding at a genuinely aggressive pace over the past year, with domestic manufacturers rapidly scaling hardware production and government-backed initiatives actively, accelerating commercialization testing across the industry. Other Chinese companies working in this space have already shipped thousands of humanoid units globally for industrial and service applications, and overall humanoid robot prices across the market have been falling sharply as production techniques mature, with average pricing reportedly dropping by more than half over roughly the past year alone. Competing firms have focused heavily on general-purpose dexterity, teaching robots to fold laundry, sort warehouse packages, or handle delicate manufacturing tasks, chasing utility over realism. Against that backdrop, Moya represents a distinctly different bet than most of her competitors. Rather than chasing dexterity for factory, floor tasks, or general-purpose household chores, DroidUp is betting specifically on emotional and social realism as the differentiator, warmth, facial nuance, eye contact, and natural feeling movement, over raw manipulation ability or industrial utility. It is a narrower bet in some ways, since a robot built primarily around social presence has fewer obvious revenue streams than one that can be dropped straight into an assembly line. But it is also a bet on an entirely different, largely untapped market, one built around emotional labor and companionship rather than physical labor. Whether that bet pays off commercially is genuinely an open question. Robots designed around emotional connection carry a much higher bar for acceptance than robots designed to lift boxes or weld car parts, precisely because people respond to social cues, instinctively and critically, in ways that are much harder to satisfy than pure mechanical performance. A robotic arm either picks up the box or it does not. A robot designed to feel like a companion either clears the uncanny valley or it very visibly, uncomfortably does not. And based on the reactions so far, Moya has not fully cleared it yet, even while genuinely pushing the boundary of what synthetic skin, thermal regulation, and facial expression systems can currently achieve together in a single walking, talking machine. So where does that leave things? Moya is real. The technology behind her, the warm skin, the in-eye cameras, the 25-degree facial expression range, the modular gender-configurable platform, all of it is genuinely functioning hardware, not a concept render or a promotional mock-up. The 92% walking accuracy claim is real in the sense that DroidUp is standing behind it publicly, even if the exact methodology behind that number remains unclear, and the visible result still reads as noticeably robotic to anyone watching closely. And the actual commercial rollout is still months away, limited to a small first batch, priced well outside individual consumer reach, and aimed primarily at institutions rather than living rooms. What Moya really represents is not a finished product quietly reshaping daily life yet. It is a genuinely significant marker of how close humanoid robotics has gotten to crossing a line that used to exist only in science fiction. The line between a machine that performs humanity convincingly on camera and one that actually feels unsettlingly close to real the moment you're standing next to it. If this breakdown was useful, consider subscribing. Because the pace robotics companies are moving at right now means a robot like this could look completely outdated within a single year. Drop a comment and tell me honestly, does a warm, expressive, human proportion